Hey, what's happening? I'm Claudio, and today I'm going to be finishing up the guitar footstool I started last week. If you missed that video, click right here. Go watch that video, then come back and we'll finish this one up. If you want to see what I did, stick around. Let's make it now. The 1/4-inch brass rod I bought was a little too large for the thin inner legs. I needed to run the rod through the center of each one. Unfortunately, the hardware store had already closed for the evening, so I had to improvise. My plan was to turn my drill press into a small inverted lathe. I drilled a stopped hole into a piece of scrap wood. I cut off a piece of brass longer than I needed and chucked it up on the machine. I made sure it was plumb and then clamped the scrap wood down. I used a file to slowly grind down the brass rod. I know this isn't incredibly precise, but it doesn't have to be. The rod just needs to be small enough to get epoxied into the holes. Eventually, it was small enough, so I smoothed and buffed the brass. This is exactly what I needed. Now I cut off the ends with some oil and a hacksaw. On the grinding wheel, I flattened the edge and rounded the burrs off. I needed to make a hole in the same spot on both legs, so I taped the two together, marked the locations, and then took them to the drill press. This drill bit was the same diameter as the milled down rod I had just made. Once the holes were drilled, I could remove the tape. The rods were a little snug, so I chucked them into a drill and slowly bored them out. With a Sharpie, I marked exactly how long they needed to be. Back on the vise, I used the hacksaw to cut the rod to length and cleaned up the end. Once I finished one side, I did the exact same thing with the other. This is how the stool rises, but the legs were binding a bit on the body. I used the shoulder plane to round down those edges to clear the legs. With the entire piece clamped together, I sanded it down with the random orbit sander. I went through 120 and 220 grits. Now that it was totally smooth, I wiped all the pieces down with a damp rag to remove any dust. I applied a couple coats of Danish oil, first applying a fairly thick coat, waiting about 15 minutes, and then wiping off any excess. I also got the oil down into all the grooves and holes. Once the pieces had dried for a couple days, I applied 2 coats of spray polyurethane. After waiting another day, it was finally time for assembly. I used epoxy to secure the rods on the joints that didn't need to rotate. Using a toothpick, I packed epoxy into the holes, inserted the rods, and then cleaned up the excess. I used this old ball peen hammer I got from my father-in-law to peen over the 2 rods that held in the outer legs. These needed to be able to rotate freely. I put another piece of rod in the vise and used that to pound against. The last thing to do was epoxy in the rod to connect the 2 outer legs. This rod also sits in the wooden grooves to lock the stool at different heights. And here's a look at the finished product. Playing on a bench at this height is uncomfortable for more than a couple minutes, and the guitar keeps wanting to slide down my leg. With the footstool, it brings my posture back upright and keeps the guitar close to my chest. It makes it much easier to reach notes and chords in the higher frets. This footstool was a lot of fun to build, and I'm hoping to keep it around for a long time. Working on small projects like this are great because all the materials are very manageable, but they do have their difficulties. The smaller the project is, the more precise everything has to be. If you're wondering about the strength of this footstool, it's plenty strong. I used red oak, which is a hardwood. I wouldn't really recommend using a softwood like pine or fir. So, if you play the guitar, this is a great accessory to have and a fun project to build. If you like this video, let me know about it in the comments, and if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can follow me on social media at Make It Now Channel and check out all my past projects on my website at makeitnow.tv. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.